My name is Evelyn Carter, and that night at the airport, I felt like my whole life was falling apart again. My flight home got canceled because of a storm, and I was stranded miles away from anywhere familiar. I hadn't spoken to my dad in years, but out of desperation, I texted him. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd be different now. His reply came a few seconds later. Good luck walking home, loser. I stared at the screen for a long time. That one message reminded me exactly who he was, cold, cruel, and proud of it. My father, Richard Carter, had always seen me as a failure. He only ever cared about my older brother, Jason. To him, Jason could do no wrong, and I could do nothing right. But that night, something inside me shifted. I wasn't that scared little girl anymore, waiting for my dad to notice me. I had built a life far from him, working hard, proving myself in silence. He didn't know how much I'd changed or what I'd achieved. And now, because of that one text, I knew I had to go home, not to ask for help, but to face the past I'd been running from. As I sat there in the airport, watching people rush by, I booked a new flight for the next morning. I wasn't sure what I would say to him, but I knew this visit wasn't about forgiveness. It was about finding answers. My mom had died years ago, and things had never made sense after that. Her death, the sudden changes in the family business, the way my father turned completely against me. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle I had never been allowed to see. When morning came, I boarded the plane with a heavy heart but a clear mind. I didn't tell anyone I was coming home. I just packed my bag and left. I kept hearing his voice in my head, calling me a loser, and instead of breaking me, it fueled me. He thought I was still weak. He had no idea who I'd become or what I knew now. The house I grew up in looked the same from the outside, but it felt different, darker somehow. As I walked up the driveway, memories came flooding back. My father yelling at me for things I didn't do, Jason smirking from the corner. My mother crying quietly at night when she thought no one could hear. All those years of silence had built up to this moment. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. I wasn't sure if he'd open it or slam it in my face, but I was ready for whatever came next. Because this time, I wasn't the girl he could insult and walk away from. I wasn't the disappointment anymore. He didn't know it yet, but his time of control was over. And the truth, the one he'd buried for years, was about to come out. I grew up in a big house that looked perfect from the outside. Tall white walls, expensive cars in the driveway, and everything money could buy. But inside, it never felt like home. My father, Richard Carter, was a powerful businessman, always talking about reputation, success, and the Carter legacy. To him, family only mattered when it made him look good. My older brother, Jason, was everything he wanted in a son, confident, loud, and willing to follow in his footsteps. I, on the other hand, was different. I liked books, quiet places, and dreams that didn't revolve around his business. When I was younger, I tried so hard to make him proud. I brought home good grades, trophies, and awards, but no matter what I did, it was never enough. He would look at my achievements and say, "Jason could have done better." That sentence followed me through my whole childhood. My mother, Grace, was the only one who ever made me feel loved. She would sit beside me at night, brushing my hair and whispering, "Don't listen to him, sweetheart. You're special in your own way." Her voice was the only warmth I knew in that cold house. As we grew older, Jason started working with Dad in the company. He got his own office, a new car, and endless praise. I still remember the day I told my father I got a full scholarship to a top university. I was so proud, thinking he would finally be happy for me. But he looked at me with disgust and said, "So, you're choosing to run away instead of helping your family? You're a mistake, Evelyn." That was the last time I tried to win his approval. College became my escape. I studied hard, worked part-time jobs, and learned what independence really meant. My mother kept in touch secretly. She would send small letters and gifts, always telling me she missed me. But one day, the letters stopped. I tried calling home, but no one answered. A week later, Jason called to say Mom had died suddenly. He didn't even sound sad. He just said it like it was another business update. When I came home for the funeral, Dad barely looked at me. He didn't hug me or speak a single kind word. Instead, he told me to leave as soon as the service ended. I remember standing in the cold outside the cemetery, watching everyone walk away, wondering what had really happened. Mom's death didn't feel natural. She had no health problems, and no one gave me answers. After that day, my father completely cut me off. My calls went unanswered. My access to family accounts was removed. It was like I never existed. Jason took full control of the business, and my father moved on like losing mom. And me didn't matter at all. But even from far away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about her death was being hidden. And deep down, I knew my father had more to do with it than anyone wanted to admit. Years passed, and I built a new life far away from home. I moved abroad after graduation and started working in real estate investment. It wasn't easy at first. I had no one to lean on, no family support, and barely any savings. But I worked long hours, took every small opportunity, and learned from every failure. Slowly, things started to change. I earned respect, stability, and peace, 3 things I never had growing up. For the first time, I felt like my life had meaning, and I didn't need anyone's approval, especially not my father's. I rarely thought about home anymore. The memories were painful, and I had learned to bury them deep. I told myself the past didn't matter, that I was free. But some wounds never really heal. They just stay quiet until something wakes them up. That night at the airport was one of those moments. I had been traveling for work, closing a major property deal that would change my career. My flight home got canceled because of bad weather, and I was stuck at the airport, exhausted and frustrated. Without thinking much, I scrolled through my contacts and stopped at my father's name. It had been years since I last spoke to him. Part of me wanted to delete the number, but another part of me, the small, hopeful part, thought maybe things were different now. Maybe time had softened him. I texted him a simple message. Hey, flight got canceled. Might need to stay somewhere for the night. It wasn't a request for help, just a message from a daughter trying to reach out. But his reply came quickly, and it cut deeper than I expected. Good luck walking home, loser. I stared at the words for a long time. My chest felt heavy, like someone had pressed all the air out of me. For years, I had convinced myself that I didn't care about his opinion, but reading that message proved otherwise. It hurt, not because I needed him, but because I realized nothing had changed. He was still the same cruel man who had thrown me away years ago. But instead of crying, I felt something else, anger, strong and sharp. That single text broke whatever fragile peace I had built around the past. I couldn't stop thinking about him, about Mom's death, about how quickly he had erased me from the family. The way he mocked me now felt like he was daring me to come back, to face him. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window of the airport hotel, replaying every moment from my childhood. The silence, the favoritism, the sudden loss of my mother. I realized I had never truly found closure. I had run away instead of seeking answers. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I booked a flight home. Not to see him out of love, but to finally uncover what he'd been hiding all these years. This time, I wasn't coming home as the broken daughter he abandoned. I was coming back as the woman ready to expose his lies. When I arrived back in my hometown, nothing looked the same. The streets felt smaller, the people older, but the heaviness in the air was exactly as I remembered. My father's mansion stood at the end of a long driveway, tall and cold, like a monument to his pride. I didn't go there first. I wasn't ready. Instead, I checked into a small hotel nearby and started looking for someone I could trust. That's when I remembered my mother's old lawyer, Mr. Hensley. I hadn't seen him since her funeral. He used to visit our house often when I was little, always kind to me even when my father wasn't. I didn't know if he'd still be around, but I decided to try. The next morning, I went to his office downtown. To my surprise, he was still there, older, slower, but sharp as ever. When he saw me, his eyes widened like he was looking at a ghost. "Evelyn Carter," he said softly, shaking my hand. "You look just like your mother." We talked for a while, catching up on life. Then I told him why I was there. I wanted to know more about my mother's estate, about what really happened after she passed. For a moment, he looked unsure, glancing at the door as if checking for listeners. Then he stood up, walked to a locked cabinet, and pulled out a thick brown envelope covered in dust. "I've been waiting for the day you'd come," he said quietly. Inside were documents with my mother's handwriting. Her real will, dated only a few weeks before she died. My hands trembled as I read it. Everything, every property, every share in the family company, every account was left to me. Not a word about my father or Jason. My mother had planned to give me everything. I felt my stomach twist. "But my father said he inherited everything after her death," I whispered. Mr. Hensley sighed and nodded. "That's what he made everyone believe. The day after your mother's funeral, he came to me with new papers, ones that claimed she changed her will. I refused to sign, so he found another lawyer willing to lie for him. I kept the original hidden, in case you ever came back. My chest burned with anger. My father had stolen not just money, but my mother's final wishes. He had lied to me, to the courts, to everyone. Can this be proven? I asked. Yes, he said firmly. The signatures on his documents are forged. I have her original copies, and I'm willing to testify. For the first time in years, I felt power shift. All those years of silence, all the pain and rejection, they suddenly made sense. My father had cut me out of his life to cover up a crime. As I left Mr. Hensley's office that day, holding the envelope tightly, I knew what came next. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, for my mother and for the daughter he tried to erase. I didn't go straight to my father after learning the truth. The old me might have stormed into his house and screamed everything I'd found, but I wasn't that person anymore. I had waited years to come home, and I could wait a little longer if it meant doing things the right way. Mr. Hensley helped me contact the right people quietly, accountants, legal advisors, and the financial departments connected to my mother's companies. Since her will clearly named me as the rightful heir, it wasn't difficult to start the process of transferring control. Every step I took had to be careful. I didn't want to alert my father too soon. With Mr. Hensley's guidance, I began to freeze accounts linked to my mother's assets. Some of them had been used by my father's company for years, hidden behind complicated paperwork. Once those accounts were frozen, it caused small ripples in his operations. Nothing major yet, but enough to get his attention. Next, I started the process of reclaiming ownership of the company's shares. My mother's will made it clear that those shares belonged to me, not him. The lawyers verified everything and confirmed the forgeries he had used. Piece by piece, the things he had stolen started slipping out of his hands without him even realizing who was behind it. I remember the moment Mr. Hensley called to tell me that the transfer was complete. I sat in my hotel room staring at the documents on my laptop. My name, Evelyn Grace Carter, was officially listed as majority owner. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like justice finally starting to move in my favor. It didn't take long for my father to notice. He was too proud not to notice money disappearing and power slipping away. For 7 years, he hadn't called or texted me. But one evening, my phone lit up with his name. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Then I answered. Evelyn, he said, his tone surprisingly soft. I heard you're back in town. His voice brought back every memory of the man who once told me I was worthless. I kept my tone calm and polite. Yes, I'm here for some business matters. That's wonderful, he said, pretending to be cheerful. Maybe we can talk. I've missed you. Missed me. The words almost made me laugh. He wasn't calling because he missed me. He was calling because he was losing control. I could hear it in his voice. There was a nervous edge, a crack in his confidence. I agreed to meet him in a few days, pretending I was happy to reconnect. But inside, I already knew how this would go. He had built his empire on lies, and now those lies were unraveling one by one. That night, I sat by the window, watching the city lights and thinking of my mother. I promised her silently that I would see this through, not with anger, but with the quiet strength she had always believed I had. The game had just begun, and this time, I was the one setting the rules. The day I went back to my father's house, the air felt heavy before I even reached the gate. The place looked just like I remembered, big, polished, and empty of warmth. The gardeners were still there, trimming bushes that never grew wild, and the tall fountain in front still spilled water like nothing had ever changed. But everything had changed. I wasn't the same person walking through those doors anymore. When the maid opened the door, she looked shocked to see me. Miss Evelyn, she said softly, almost unsure if she should speak my name. I gave her a small smile and nodded. She stepped aside, and there he was, my father, standing in the hallway, pretending to be happy to see me. Evelyn, he said, spreading his arms like he was welcoming home a loved daughter. It's been so long. I forced a polite smile. It has. He looked older, his hair grayer, but his eyes still had that same sharpness, the kind that could cut through anyone who opposed him. His smile didn't reach his eyes, though. It never did. He motioned for me to sit, acting like we were a happy family catching up after years apart. The whole scene felt like a performance, one he had rehearsed 1,000 times in his head. Then Jason walked in. He looked just like Dad, same arrogance, same fake charm. The smirk on his face appeared the moment he saw me. Well, look who decided to crawl back, he said. The runaway daughter. I didn't answer. I just looked at him calmly, which seemed to bother him more than any words could. Silence had power, and I used it. He kept talking, trying to get a reaction, but I stayed quiet, sipping the tea the maid had brought. Dad finally spoke again, his voice gentle but careful. "I'm glad you came back. Maybe we can start fresh. Family is important, Evelyn." Hearing him say that almost made me laugh. Family, to him, meant control. It meant power and obedience. But I didn't show any emotion. I simply nodded and said, "That's what I want too." He seemed pleased with my answer, but I could see the worry behind his smile. The recent financial troubles from the frozen accounts had shaken him. He didn't mention them, but I knew he was dying to find out if I had anything to do with it. Jason eventually got bored and left, muttering something under his breath. Dad and I sat alone in that cold, beautiful living room surrounded by paintings my mother had once chosen. Her presence was still there, even if he had tried to erase her memory. As I looked around, I remembered being that young girl sitting on the same couch, scared of every word he said. But not anymore. This time, I wasn't here to beg or to prove anything. I was here with the truth, and the legal documents that gave me power over everything he thought was his. When I stood up to leave, he tried to act casual. "We should have dinner tomorrow, just us," he said. I smiled slightly. "Of course, Dad. I'd love that." He had no idea that tomorrow's dinner would be the beginning of his downfall. I walked out of that house calm and confident, knowing that the game he started years ago was finally coming to an end. And this time, he wasn't the one in control. The next evening, I returned to the house for dinner just like he had asked. The dining room looked the same as it always had. Long polished table, silver plates, tall candles, and walls lined with family portraits. My mother's photo hung at the far end, and for the first time, I didn't look away when I saw it. I could almost feel her watching me, calm and steady, reminding me why I was there. Dad was already seated, pretending everything was normal. Jason was beside him, scrolling through his phone with that same careless smirk. The smell of roasted meat filled the air, but I couldn't eat. My mind was focused on what I had to do. Dad started the conversation as if we were an ordinary family. "So, Evelyn, I heard you've been working abroad. Must be doing well for yourself," he said, slicing his food slowly. "Yes," I replied simply. "I've done better than I expected." He smiled thinly, probably wondering what that meant. Jason leaned back in his chair. "You always thought you were too good for us, didn't you? Running away was the best thing you did. We had peace after you left." I ignored him. Instead, I reached into my bag and placed a brown envelope on the table. "Actually, I came to talk about Mom." That got both their attention. Dad's fork froze midair. Jason frowned. "What about her?" I took a deep breath and opened the envelope. "About what she left behind. And what you've been hiding." Dad's eyes narrowed. "Evelyn, I don't think this is the right time for." "This is the right time." I cut him off, keeping my voice steady. I pulled out the documents, the original will, signed and sealed by my mother. "This is Mom's real will. The one you hid. The one that leaves everything, the houses, the shares, the accounts, to me." The room went silent. Jason's mouth fell open. Dad went pale, then tried to laugh it off. "That's ridiculous. Those papers mean nothing. The court already recognized my inheritance years ago." I looked him straight in the eyes. "Because you forged it." He slammed his hand on the table. "You don't know what you're talking about." I didn't flinch. I reached into the envelope again and pulled out a USB drive. Mr. Hensley recorded a video the day Mom signed the will. He also recorded his statement about your forgery. Jason shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, is she serious?" Dad's face turned red. "She's lying." But his voice trembled, and that was enough. I plugged the drive into the laptop I'd brought and pressed play. My mother's voice filled the room, soft, gentle, and full of truth. She was sitting beside Mr. Hensley, reading out her will, naming me as her only heir. The timestamp was clear. The signature matched perfectly. When the video ended, no one spoke. Jason looked at Dad with disbelief. "You forged Mom's will?" he whispered. Dad's shoulders slumped. The powerful man who once ruled this house now looked small and defeated. "You don't understand," he muttered. "I built all this. I deserved it." I stood up slowly. "You built it with lies. And now it's over." The silence that followed felt heavy, final. Jason pushed his chair back and walked out, shaking his head. I gathered the documents and left them on the table in front of my father. Everything he had stolen was now slipping away, legally, publicly, completely. That night, I didn't feel angry or even satisfied. I just felt free. The truth was out, and the man who once called me a loser had finally lost everything. After that dinner, everything started falling apart faster than I expected. Within a few weeks, the truth spread through every corner of my father's business empire. The courts reviewed the original will, confirmed the forgery, and officially transferred ownership of all my mother's assets to me. For the first time, my father's name no longer controlled the companies he had built on lies. It was strange to see it in writing. Evelyn Grace Carter, owner and majority shareholder. When the legal papers were finalized, everything began to crumble for him. His personal accounts were frozen after investigators found suspicious transfers tied to the forged documents. Some of his partners cut ties immediately, afraid of being linked to fraud. Reporters started calling his office nonstop, asking questions about the forged will and missing funds. The proud, untouchable man who once looked down on everyone was now hiding behind lawyers and locked doors. Jason didn't handle it any better. The debts he had hidden under the company's name suddenly became his responsibility. Creditors and collectors started chasing him, demanding payments. He called me once, his voice panicked, asking for help. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. But then I remembered every cruel word, every time he laughed when our father humiliated me. I simply told him, "You'll have to figure it out the way I did." That was the last time I heard from him. Soon after, I found out he had left the country. As for my father, he tried everything to get sympathy. He sent messages through old family friends, pretending he was a victim of misunderstanding. Some even came to me, asking if I could forgive him, if I could let him keep something small. I listened quietly, but didn't say yes or no. The truth was, I had no hate left, just emptiness. He had taken so much from me that there was nothing left to take back emotionally. Justice had already done its work. Eventually, he lost the mansion too. The same house where I once stood outside, unwanted and alone, was now part of my legal inheritance. I didn't rush to move in. I let the lawyers handle everything while I stayed away. When they told me he had left the house, refusing to speak to anyone, I just nodded. The man who used to boast about power and money now had neither. People who once looked at me with pity or judgment suddenly started treating me with respect. They whispered about how smart and strong I had become, how I'd turned everything around. But I didn't care about their opinions anymore. None of them had stood by me when I was being humiliated. At night, I often thought about my mother, how she must have known what kind of man she married, and why she made sure her will protected me. Every decision she made led me to this moment. My father's empire was gone, Jason had disappeared, and the truth had finally come to light. The same people who had once mocked me now wanted my approval, but I gave them nothing. For years, I had been powerless, but now I understood something deeper. Real power doesn't come from wealth or control. It comes from truth. And that truth had finally destroyed the empire my father built on lies. Weeks later, I finally decided to visit the house again, the place where everything had started and ended. It was officially mine now. The court documents had been processed, and the keys rested in my hand as I stood outside the tall iron gates. The wind carried a quiet stillness, the kind that comes after a storm. I had imagined this moment so many times growing up, returning home with pride, proving my father wrong. But standing there now, I didn't feel pride or revenge. I felt calm. I parked my car at the end of the long driveway, the same one my father once told me to walk home, loser, from. Back then, I had left that road in tears, feeling unwanted and small. Now, I walked the same path again, but my steps were steady. I wasn't that girl anymore. The house looked the same, tall windows, perfect garden, every corner carefully kept up by people who once looked through me like I didn't belong. But the energy was different. It no longer felt like his house. It felt empty, waiting for a new chapter to begin. As I reached the front door, I hesitated for a moment before unlocking it. The sound of the door creaking open echoed through the hallway, carrying memories I had buried for years. I stepped inside slowly, taking it all in. The scent of polished wood, the paintings my mother had chosen, and the staircase where I used to sit and read when no one wanted to talk to me. Everything was still there. Only the people had changed. I walked through each room, touching the walls and furniture, not with anger, but with quiet acceptance. Every corner reminded me of pain, my father's harsh words, Jason's laughter at my expense, my mother's soft voice trying to protect me. But it also reminded me of how far I had come. I had survived everything they tried to break me with. In my father's old office, I stopped for a long time. The desk was empty, the drawers cleared out. The room that once felt like a prison now felt like freedom. I looked out the window, the same one I used to stare through as a teenager dreaming of escape. Now I was back, not because I needed to prove anything, but because I had already won in my own way. I sat in my mother's favorite chair by the window. For a moment, I closed my eyes and could almost hear her voice again, gentle and comforting. "You're stronger than you think," she used to say. Back then, I didn't believe her. Now I understood what she meant. My father's cruelty had shaped my strength, even though he never intended to. When I finally stood up to leave, I looked around one last time. I didn't feel hate toward the house or even toward him anymore. I felt peace. The pain had taught me who I was. The loneliness had built my courage. And the betrayal had led me to truth. As I walked back to my car, the sun broke through the clouds, shining over the driveway. I smiled softly. This wasn't revenge, it was closure. I was finally free, and for the first time in my life, I was truly home. I sat in my mother's old study, the same room where she used to spend her evenings writing letters and reading. The air felt warm and familiar, like she was still there somehow. On the desk, I noticed a small envelope with my name written in her neat handwriting. My heart tightened as I picked it up. I had never seen this before. The paper was a little yellowed with time, but her words were clear. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a short letter, written in her calm, gentle tone, the kind that always made me feel safe. It began simply, "My dear Evelyn." I took a deep breath and continued reading. She wrote about how proud she was of me for always following my heart, even when it meant walking away from comfort and facing judgment. She said she knew things would not be easy with my father, that his pride would never let him see the goodness in others. But she believed that one day the truth would rise, and when it did, she wanted me to remember something important. "Never let cruelty define you," she wrote. "Let it reveal who you truly are." Those words hit me deeply. For years, I had carried anger, pain, and sadness. I had been treated like I was nothing, like I didn't belong in my own family. My father's words had shaped my childhood, words like mistake and disappointment. But now I understood. Those words didn't define me. My actions did. My strength did. My ability to rise from everything he tried to destroy. That was who I truly was. I looked around the study, remembering all the afternoons I used to sit on the floor while my mother read to me. She always told me that love and kindness weren't weaknesses, even if people took advantage of them. "Kindness doesn't mean you're weak," she would say. "It means you're brave enough to be gentle in a hard world." Now, sitting there, I finally believed her. My father had taught me how cruel people could be, how far they'd go for power. But my mother had taught me something stronger. How to live with heart, how to stand tall without becoming bitter. He had taught me survival, but she had taught me life. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back on the desk. My eyes stung, but I wasn't crying from sadness anymore. It was something else, peace, maybe. For the first time, I felt free from the shadow of everything that had happened. As I looked out the window, the afternoon sun poured into the room, filling it with light. I smiled softly. I wasn't the loser my father called me. I wasn't the mistake he claimed I was. I was my mother's legacy, her strength, her love, her quiet power. Walking out of the study, I carried her words in my heart. They weren't just a letter, they were a reminder that even in pain, there can be grace. My story didn't end in revenge or loss. It ended in understanding. I finally knew who I was, and that was enough.